Namaste friends, I am Vinoy Krishna, Science and Technology faculty as well as the Anthropology optional faculty at Vajiram and Ravi. The motivation for our meeting today on the other day of 15th August and the 80th Independence Day as we have celebrated is the fact that ISRO or Indian Space Research Organization, India's leading space agency, has also celebrated on that very day its Founders Day. 15th of August 1969 is when we started with our space program, and from there to have travelled 57 years ahead, we have many reasons to rejoice. As I was relaxing, watching the news yesterday on my off day, what elated me were some of the achievements that have been done by many of the private companies in the Indian space ecosystem. I believe many of you must have read yesterday that there is a Bhubaneswar based company called Serendipity Space that has achieved a rare feat where in the very higher altitudes of atmosphere bordering the outer space, they have managed to conduct the pharmaceutical chemical reactions or the pharma production in the microgravity conditions. Well, microgravity pharma production has its own merits, but that's not the topic of our discussion here. But the fact that it is a rare feat to have been achieved and augurs well for the future. Other than this, there have been many other achievements, something that we can all feel very proud of. Many of it, of course, I believe all of you must have also got to read about. This was just a week before we celebrated our Independence Day, when a Bengaluru-based company called Astrobase Space Technology managed for the first time the high thrust propulsion system called the full flow staged combustion system. Now this engine, people, will generate very high thrust, which is akin to the Raptor engine that is used by Falcon series of rockets as by SpaceX, which is known for its high carrying capacity and the greater load that it can take to the space. Well, these are just a couple of them. We in the last few months and few years have also been getting to read many of the achievements made by our private companies. For example, I believe almost all of you by now are updated and well versed with the achievement made by Skyroot Aerospace, the first unicorn in the private sector in the space in India, wherein we made the first successful launch of first successful orbital launch of Vikram 1 launch vehicle. Well, it carried many of the payloads like Graha Space by the Graha Space agency, Solaris satellite, which could be making the real-time video of the Earth's surface. Some of the space debris, technical demonstrator missions. A couple of them were more of the symbolic things like cosmic, the diamond floret that was taken up, along with some micro sculptures of gold of the greats of India like C.V. Raman, Vikram Sarabhai, Abdul Kalam, etc., amongst few others. Now, just few months from now, Vikram 1 would also be followed up by another big waiting under the wings launch vehicle called Agniban, that of another such private sector company called Agnikul Cosmos. And then other than the launch vehicles, we would also have read about some major achievements like Drishti, Mission Drishti by Galaxy Eye private company was India's first optosar satellite, wherein it was capable of clicking photos in the visible range during the daytime, while the synthetic aperture radar that it had, SAR as you call it, is also capable of taking images at night or even in the cloudy conditions. So all of these achievements and many more that I have tried to pack into this particular slide. For example, the Agnikul Cosmos is also trying to innovate the reusable system, which is going to be a major achievement if pulled off, because that will bring down the cost of launches by a significant margin. Other than this, there are few others, like in collaboration with ISRO's support, the first semi-cryogenic engine test was also done by Agnikul Cosmos. They have also made the limelight for having made the first 3D printed engine for the launch vehicle. So what I could summarize in all of it, that we are at a very crucial phase of evolution of India's space program, which no one would have imagined at the point when we all had a very modest beginning 57 years ago from a small little church in Tumba, Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. These are some of the well popularized images trying to show you how the Apple satellite getting tested on the bullock cart used as a platform, or for that matter, the tip of the rocket getting carried on the back of the bicycle. So we see that with this humble a beginning, wherein India's entry into the space program was primarily guided by what we call as the Sarabhai doctrine. I believe it is well known that the father of India's space program, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, who was spearheading India's space program, started with it when the world was watching the space race in its full bloom. So space was a territory which was being ventured upon by the superpowers of the time, not only for the national building, but more so also for military gesturing to each other. So it was a time when our decision to venture into space was something that was also critically evaluated, which our space forefather made it very clear that we would be entering into the space technology for national development and not for power or prestige, what we call as the Sarabhai doctrine. But are we still in that stage or phase of following the dictums of the Sarabhai doctrine, or has Indian space program evolved way ahead from there? That is going to be the larger topic of our discussion today. And along with this, some of the news that I have just talked about, you, I believe, must have also come across the news about the resignations in mass that were reported from ISRO. It was also something that was quite widely covered, critically evaluated by many of the national and international media. In my opinion, possibly we have just scratched the surface and there is much more than what meets the eye. So we will also try to decode what is behind the story of many of the resignations as being reported from ISRO. Is it just ISRO specific? Is it just the present state? Or is it much widespread? Or it is a very natural progression any program or any technological domain in any country has to go through. Now you see, when it all started, people, we had decided that the space technology investments would be primarily for all the major applications that concern the nation building, or peaceful applications like communication, weather forecasting, the agricultural planning, education, healthcare, and very much so in the oceanographic applications like cyclone management, the finding of the potential fishing zones, the coastal changes, all of it. But then as the time progresses and as ISRO gains its footing a little stronger, now we also witnessed the 1990s onward the stage of economic liberalization. That was the time when ISRO also, so we have now entered into the next phase of evolution. The first, of course, was the Sarabhai doctrine, as we have just talked about, which primarily was about utilizing space technology in every single penny for its direct applicational value. But post 1990s, the economic liberalization and India's desire to increase its geopolitical dominance, not in the sense of dominance, but yes, its reach much more. And that is when you see that ISRO also ventured into commercializing of its technologies. And that is when in 1992, the commercial arm of ISRO started its operation, Antrix, headquartered in Bengaluru. What we also witnessed during the same phase, people, 1990s onwards, is that other than the conventional communication and weather forecasting and remote sensing satellites, we also now started to work on using space technology and its potential for our strategic needs. And that is when the India's navigation satellite system came up, Navik, which started somewhat around in 2013 in its first generation. I'm sure all of you have also been reading about the evolution in the navigation program itself that we are going through. The first generation of navigation satellites have almost lived their life entirely. Just a couple of satellites which are still alive and providing the service, but that also quite uncertain. And hence we are presently working on establishing the second generation of satellites, as they have huge importance for both civilian as well as during the war times for the precise targeting of missiles. Now, other than this, people, post 2000, what ISRO also ventured into is the space exploration. So what we are now finding that from Sarabhai doctrine, which talked about using every single penny for the applicational value, we are now witnessing the fact that Government of India is now going big or bigger. We are now planning to go for extraterrestrial surfaces, and that is where comes in the Chandrayaan series 1, 2, 3, and of course I hope you remember 23rd August 2023, which we celebrate as National Space Day. We made a rare feat of landing close to the South Pole and becoming the only nation to have gone that close to the South Pole. By the way, South Pole is a very sought after territory on the moon because of its richness in the water. Water will act as a good resource for sustenance of humans over there, and also to be used for turning that water into the launch fuel to hop on to the deeper space objects. That's a separate stream of discussion. Now, other than Chandrayaan, we also ventured towards the Mars with our Mangalyaan. We entered into the exploration of Sun with Aditya, Exposat, Astrosat, and all of it. But then what we are witnessing is across the span of time, we are witnessing that ISRO as an institution is undergoing expansion in its job. ISRO as a sole body, the only space agency of the country till the time we have discussed, has got to do or has got to make the launch vehicles. It is involved in the making and launching of satellites, providing the downstream applications from there. By downstream applications, we mean getting the functions of the satellites be realized to the last person. Now, other than this, ISRO is also as an organization doing R&D, developing new technologies. ISRO has now also got to participate in the commercial activities. So it is also now doing some business. So commercialization, where it is now selling the launching services of its launch vehicles to many of the agencies. Initially, let me tell you that ISRO had a great advantage of using the cheap labor that India had, and we made it a point from the very beginning that we have frugal innovations where we realized some very state-of-the-art achievements with meager means. I mean, it all started, if you remember, putting the satellite on the platform provided by the bullock cart and taking it for communication testing. It has been the very cardinal trait of not just space technology. You will find this mentioned quite often in a quite dramatic sense of comparing the budgets of many of the space programs with some of the movies made by Hollywood. Not a very logical comparison though, but certainly it aims at striking the fact that we managed to achieve some big targets with meager or moderate investments. But what I am trying to express here, people, that ISRO as an organization is now, as they are expanding and diversifying into multiple kind of activities, is now facing what I can call the term institutional overload. Institutional overload. Now, this has its own demerits, because with the institutional expansion with respect to human resource not happening in that proportion, it would mean the budgetary allocation would have extra strain of getting diversified into those many areas. Not only the budget getting split into satisfying all these activities, you see, you are also splitting the human resource, human resource, wherein you will find that the same expert is handling multiple different projects, and that it brings much overload on the person per se, and also it slows down the development of individual projects as such. So what has this budget split, the human resource split has led to? It has led to inordinate delays in the various projects or missions. I can give you a couple of instances for that matter. Let us say one of the technology which has almost become indispensable to stay competitive in the launching market, which is one of the lion's share of the entire space economy. I'll talk about the space economy valuation soon. So reusable launch vehicle is one of the most disruptive technology in the launching segment. You see, India started developing the reusable launch vehicle years ago. The first such trial that we conducted was in 2016. And you see, the next one happened 8 years later, 23-24 was the time period when we went into reusable launch vehicle trial again. I hope all of you, through the newspaper reportage in the recent time, must have also been reading about the delay that is happening on the Gaganyaan mission. One of the main worry that we have, because Gaganyaan is important from two major, I would say lenses. One, of course, the prestige it carries for becoming capable of taking humans into the space. But more so, the Gaganyaan is going to be the first step towards establishing the Bharatiya Antariksha Station, which is going to be a more of a sustainable platform for keeping the Gagannauts, as we are going to be calling our astronauts, in the space for a longer period. So Gaganyaan has already been, it should have been already conducted years ago, but then the COVID happened, and post the COVID there are other reasons, of course, we'll be discussing that, which has been causing delays in that. Just talking about Navik for that matter, I'm sure you have come across the news talking about how India, with respect to its navigational services or PNT services, is in a little precarious position. I mean, for functional navigation we require 4 satellites access at all times. At present we have just 3 of them, and hence the position service that we derive through the navigation satellite lies suspended. Very soon we might see the launch of another one, but just to tell you, the first generation Navik satellites, 7 of them, took 5 years to be lifted. It started in 2013 and the lift got consummated, the entire assembly, in 5 years. By which time, by the time we are lifting the last satellite, the first few have already lived most of their life, without coming into the application. The CAG had red flagged this particular issue back then, that despite the crores of investment that has gone into it, the civilian applications of the navigation has not been realized. Well, there are multiple reasons for it, but one that I have already talked about is the fact that ISRO as an institution is facing that stretch or institutional overhead, overload, sorry. Now, other than this, you see what is happening parallelly. Now, other than the fact that India's desire to be evolving from the state of being space capable to space power is leading you to diversify into multiple domains, be it applied area, be it the strategic, preparedness, as well as the exploration. At the same time, the world is undergoing the private sector expansion. There have been companies across the world which are acquiring huge might of operation. I hope you must have come across the development that Elon Musk has become the world's first trillionaire. More so on the basis of the promises that he is making. He is making us, venture into the dreamy land of colonizing the Mars and whatnot. But yes, their technical and economic might is something that is not debatable. So what we are witnessing is that across the world, the agencies are becoming bigger, they are becoming more in number, and hence there is a pressure of survival on ISRO or Indian space program. You see, at present, the estimate for the global space economy is $600 billion plus. global space economy is $600 billion plus. How much of it is competed for by ISRO or Indian space program? It is less than 2%. So over $8 billion is what our share in that could be. Now with this, despite all the symbolic aspects that are there with the space as such because of its huge optics value, we on the realistic estimate are lagging behind in a big way. So much so that whatever little advantage that I told about in the launching that we had because of frugal innovation and the cheap labor that we have is almost outdone by the agencies like SpaceX. I will quickly show you how much, so how much is the charge for launching any payload or any satellite into the space being taken by an Indian launch vehicle vis-a-vis the Falcon series. You see PSLV, which is the major workhorse of India's launching segment, we charge $8,500 per kg for taking it in the space, which is a gross averaging out approximation, whereas GSLV over $10,000. But look at Falcon 9, it is over 50% cheaper than PSLV. And look at Falcon Heavy, it is 80% plus cheaper than PSLV. What is that indicative of? That is indicative of more amount of money put by these agencies in developing new technologies. The major reason why Falcon is capable of outcompeting whatever little advantage that ISRO or India had is they have developed the reusable launch vehicle. So the same launch vehicle they are capable of using and reusing, that brings down the cost, and of course they outcompete in the market. So this is something that was covered by national international media. This is the reportage that happened by the Economic Times in November 2024 itself. You can in such parts of this discussion pause the video if at all interested. You can take down the header or the topic of this news and go and read to further enrich yourself on that topic. So this is one exhaustive coverage that I could find Economic Times had done way back, and hence people, what are we now coming up to? So we are at a stage where the Indian space program just cannot remain just government owned and operated. We have to open up, and this is something that is realized by the government, and 2020 onwards we as a policy have decided to open up the space sector, and hence it makes for academic and your exam preparation importance to know what all decisions have been taken to respond to the challenge that has been thrown by the global competitive space ecosystem. You see, the government decides that we would liberalize the space sector, by which we mean that the private companies can now have the choice of evolving from their earlier position of just being vendors, where they used to supply the components, the tools and the different instruments and equipments, to the end-to-end service providers. End-to-end service providers. And by that we mean that we are opening up the sector for the private companies to start providing the launching services. So there will be companies, and that is what initially at the build up we talked about Agnikul Cosmos and Skyroot Aerospace Vikram launch vehicle. So these are the agencies that are already providing the launching services, end to end. Now I would suggest you could any fine day, or as you watch this lecture, you can quickly escape to the Skyroot Aerospace website and look into how intuitive interface they have made. I mean, you can just go to their website and they will have a tab wherein you can book your launch. They are allowing you to choose your orbit, the mass of your satellite, the date of launch. So it is becoming as simple as a cab service booking, and that is something that spells really good for India's space future. So launching services, the satellite services. Now there are many companies which in India have already got their satellites lifted and they are providing services like Galaxy Eye that I talked about. So then there is Digantra Space. So there are many, Dhruva Space. So there are these agencies, people who are already getting their satellites like Firefly, Scott or Drishti that we talked about, have already gone into the sky and they are already generating the images which could be useful for civilian as well as military applications. Well, so the satellite launching, the downstream service provider. So the entire space activity could be on a functional basis be grouped into upstream activities and downstream activities. Upstream activities, they include the launching or making and placing the satellites, while the downstream activities, they include getting the services from the satellites on the ground and then making it available in a functional manner to the consumers. So there are companies which are also now getting expertise in the downstream activities. All of it thanks to the 2020 decision onwards to open up. But then the fact remains, mere decision to open up will be of no value. So what are the steps being taken to allow a good fertile ground for growth for these private companies? And this is what that will again make for a very good, content preparation for the probable questions you can expect in the UPSC. You see, there are some of the steps that have been taken. In 2019, the Government of India came up with an ISRO subcenter called New Space India Limited, NSIL. Now what is this for? This is to become the enabler of technology transfer to the private. So it is something that facilitates the selling of the technology and services that ISRO produces to many of the private companies, India and the world of course. So NSIL is going to allow the facilitated transfer, of course, through the commercial agreements to the private entities. Other than that, next year you also saw the creation of an autonomous body called InSpace or Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. I'll repeat, Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. As the name itself is suggestive, this autonomous body is primarily meant for the authorization of the multiple private projects by or the projects of ISRO as well. So this is a common check post through which all the private companies as well as ISRO has to go through to get authorized for their different activities. It is also an organization that facilitates the infrastructure sharing, because you see, as you open up the space sector, please remember that space is a long gestation technology domain. So you cannot expect as you open up the sector for the private companies to come of age, and hence initially it would require the hand holdings by the one which has already developed that expertise. So it is something that allows the infrastructure sharing. A very good example for this could be the sharing of Sriharikota launchpad for the launch that all of us celebrated, Vikram 1. And if you could just listen to this tiny section of the talk given by the CEO Pawan Chandana after the launch was realized.
In fact, we stand here at one of the best spaceports in the world, and we are very proud to launch Vikram 1 from the most versatile launch pads in the world, and really thank ISRO for enabling this. And more importantly, I would like to appreciate and also thank entire InSpace team which has efficiently authorized this launch. And in fact, I've seen companies waiting for launch authorization for so much time, and India has proved it that government is the most efficient. And in fact, they enabled this launch in record time. There was zero delay in authorizing India's first private orbital launch. And like I was telling the Honorable Prime Minister with pride, this is a 100% designed in India rocket, 100% made in India rocket, built by 100% Indian people, for India, for the world.
So you can see he has made it quite categorical that it was the InSpace which ensured a very quick authorization and a very smooth authorization so that they could pull off this launch in a record time, as he said. He is also very proudly carrying the fact that it has been entirely made by India and launched by India. So yes, it is indeed a proud moment from that respect. So InSpace is going to become a very important body in the coming time, as the private sector is undergoing a much bigger boom at the moment. So other than facilitating the sharing of the facilities, authorizing the different projects that they get to face, InSpace also makes the national guidelines and the operating procedures for the different activities, for satellite making, for launch vehicles, for space situational awareness, for tracking all the objects into the space. So here is a body that is going to take care of all those administrative fluidity, so that there are no hiccups available in that. Now, other than providing the institutional supports like NSIL and InSpace for that matter, the Government of India has also ensured that they are providing the initial fund support. So there is something called as venture capital fund support that they are also providing. Nearly 1,000 crore rupees is the fund set aside for that. And also technology adoption fund, nearly 500 crores, which is going to be supporting with the fund to the many of the private entities if they have the ideas for that. Now, other important aspect, people, which will be extremely important of how to create a good, fertile, stable ecosystem for future. You see, the mind which creates the innovative idea generally lies in the university ecosystems. So it is extremely important to create a good, fertile ecosystem in the universities, which would then be translating into the functional startups. And that is why the Government of India or the Department of Space has been starting with space technology incubation centers, which is the dedicated centers in multiple engineering colleges where they would be supporting the development of multiple technologies, or for that matter. So you can see there are various regional academic centers for space which will be promoting the research activities. You can see most of the NIT, so this is now being taken care that the ecosystem is developed across the length and the breadth of the country rather than being concentrated into one region. And you can see it is including multiple NITs other than the IIT. So other than regional academic centers, which will be more about the academic research, they are also developing space technology incubation centers, which is more about converting the innovation into the functional technologies and then to provide them the industrial incubation. And that is why the term space technology incubation center. So there will be industries which will be providing the support system to these young Turks, and that will be converting into multiple workable startups, as we see. You see NIT Jalandhar, NIT Bhopal, NIT Nagpur, Agartala, Rourkela, Trichy, and so on. So what we have is a good, robust pool creation. So with the Space Technology Incubation Center and regional academic centers, we are at the same time also focusing on the creation of multiple talent pools. Now people, other than the InSpace, NSIL, the fund support, and of course also creating the breeding ecosystem for creation of the new startups, what we at this point in time need to be very categorical about, your entire space program at the moment entire space program at the moment is being governed by the bunch of policies and vision statements. Or in other words, through executive tools alone. For example, the post 2020, all those changes that I've just listed out came as a result of dedicated Indian Space Policy 2023. So what did Indian Space Policy do? It created more objectivity into, or more institutionalized structure into the space program governance. So in space, NSIL, all this funding support and everything now comes under the Indian Space Policy dictum. Other than that, we also have remote sensing data policy, or SATCOM policy, which talks about the governance principles that will be used for the communication satellites applications. But then this is one of the possible drawback that at the moment Indian space program is facing. Being governed entirely by the executive mechanism, despite opening up the sector, and one thing that I forgot to tell you, that other than these instruments that we have just seen, we have also been allowing the FDIs, gradually we have been increasing up to 100% in the different segments of the space technology. It is graded in the different area, which will not be entering into at the moment, but yes, we have also been allowing the foreign direct investment through the automatic route, so it becomes super fluid. But then people, with all of these, the biggest lacuna or the lacking, which is kind of inhibiting us in realizing the fullest potential of the space segment, is the lack of a comprehensive space law. So there is no yet a legislation which would set the objectivity in licensing norms, in the environment norms, in the dispute resolution, in the insurance liabilities. What will be the appellate authority? And in the absence of any such law, the confidence for investment is certainly something that gets dampened, because it is for any investor, the executive decision could undergo quick changes, compared to the law, which for any change would require the constitutional or legislature. And that is why people, in order to bring more stability and more confidence into the investor, while you are constructing your answer, you must talk about the lack of one comprehensive law, which is something at the moment already in the draft stage. Not to say that nothing is being done, but it has been in the draft stage for quite some time. It started in 2017 itself, if I am correct. Draft Space Activities Bill. So you can always bring this up and say that what we need to accelerate the development is to construct the law which brings more predictability, because space technology investments are long gestation investments, and the possibility of quick changes will always act as a huge discouragement. So this is one thing. Another reason why we require the laws to be there, people, because India is a signatory to many international norms in the space. For example, India is a signatory to what you call as Outer Space Treaty, OST, that we signed way back. It was something that came up through UN in 1967, which talks about the fact that the entire outer space belongs to the entire mankind and no one can have a sovereign claim over it. Then there are treaties like Registration Agreement, then Liabilities Agreement. So these are, or Rescue Agreement. Now these are some of the tools of international law that we are a signatory to. In the absence of our own law, there are two problems, because you need to have your own law to stand in conformation with the international law. Another is, in case of any complications or the case getting to the law, legal route, in the absence of any national legislation, the court of law would also give its ruling based on the international agreements that we are a party to. So it is extremely important that we have our own priority based law, which will ensure that under no condition our interests would be jeopardized. So this is one suggestion that you can always make, but with that, what we understand that we are in a very pleasant state where we have been generating some good outcomes in the private sector, something that I have already talked about in the beginning. Let me show you some more. Like, recently there came a report that for every $1 of the space output that our space program generates, we create the economic impact of the scale of $2.54. So for every economic valuation of the space activity of $1, the ultimate economic spillover overall is going to be nearly 2.5 times of that. So that is a real good data to support that yes, investment in the space sector is going to be having a rich economic spin-off, so to say. So you see, it is also generating a lot of jobs other than agriculture, the disaster management, the infrastructure, the military, all of that included. Yes, it is going to have huge impact. Further, the government of India has also answered in the parliament that to further support the private activities and more investment, there have been concessions on the customs duty, and the GST has also been reduced for, or rather it has been exempted for the satellite launch services. There are other activities in the space also. There is consideration going on for waiving off of the GST for many other activities of the space, of course. So what we now see from the rebates perspective also, the government of India has been responding to the need of the hour, so that what is in the state of infancy is something that goes on to become a major aspect. So some of the news, people, that you must have also come, these are going to be examples that you can always use in your answer writing. You see, these are all recent. You can see I have highlighted the time at which it got reported. 5 ISRO technologies transferred to private companies. Recently, InSpace has brought out the expression of interest for the transfer of technology for PSLV. Very soon you will see the productionization of PSLV by HAL, Hindustan Aeronautics, and ultimately the goal would be for ISRO to transfer the technology of the PSLV to the private company itself. Now that is one. Another, you can see we are going to have a new launch station. I believe you must have all come across this news itself, that India, other than its primary launch center at Sriharikota, is now going to get another launch station further down the south of the Indian peninsula. So we have already got one here, but another we are going to be getting here at what is called as Kulasekarapattinam. Which is coming up at Tuticorin district of Tamil Nadu. You see how serious the Department of Space is about promoting the private activity, this particular launch station would soon, as it gets functional after initial operational support to be provided by ISRO for the private companies, it would be handed over to the private sector itself. So you can imagine what's the future in store, because this Kulasekara Pattinam would be utilized for the launching of small satellites. And let me tell you, the market for the small satellite launch at the moment is massive. By small satellite, people, in case if there is ever a prelims question, remember, by small satellites we mean the satellites which are less than 500 kgs. And you can see at moment the launch service segment for the small satellite is valued $14.5 billion. And as we are entering now into more of the surveillance and the earth observation and internet service provider, as you know, Starlink is going to have in its assembly more than 40,000 satellites. We are talking about the data centers which are going to have over a million of satellites to provide a robust global infrastructure. We are going to see a massive upsurge in the demand for the launch of small satellites, and that is why the getting launch ready for Vikram or Agniman is going to be very timely. Other than that, you see, ISRO has already sold the technology of one of its small satellite launch vehicle, or SSLV, last year to the private sector. Who bought it? So, to the non-ISRO entity. So, technology transfer agreement signed for small satellite launch vehicle. So, they are already making the satellite be handed over to the non-ISRO entities. Like HAL is going to be making the small satellite launch vehicle, and hence the ISRO gradually, through these news, what we can understand, is going to give up on its routine activities. So, ISRO will now give up gradually on the routine activities like making and launching of launch vehicles and making and launching of satellites. So, what would ISRO now primarily focus on? ISRO would primarily focus on technology development, which is cost intensive, high risk investment, which initially the private sector could not be expected to put a lot of money in, because they are not sitting on the cushion of huge revenue or the profit that they have generated. So, technology development, ISRO would majorly involve in exploration exercises like Mangalyaan or Chandrayaan. I hope all of you know that Chandrayaan 4 is just around the corner, to be followed up by Chandrayaan 5 and Mangalyaan 2 as well, and Shukrayaan as well. So, you see, ISRO is going to now largely focus on the exploratory exercises. So, ISRO as an organization is gradually now becoming a semblance of what NASA has been for the decades now. So, NASA is something that kind of sets the plan. It talks about what technology, it does develop many of the bigger technologies, but most of the technology that NASA requires, they contract out. So, there is a term that they call as contract out or contracting out, which is something that we are soon going to be now discussing. So, gradually ISRO would focus only on this part and taking care of the geopolitical, geostrategic aspects of it, and the private sector would be armed enough or empowered enough to capitalize on the huge demand that the space economic market has to offer. Let me tell you, we are not tapping even 10% of what the national demand for the space applications is. So, imagine how much is the scope that we have still for it. So, this is the larger understanding that I wanted you to have, like where are we in the different stages of evolution. If I could give you a very quick review. So, remember the Sarabhai doctrine, it is what that took our space program for the nation building till 90s. Post 90s, we started explorations and entering into strategic exercises as well, like NAVIC. But 2020 onwards, we are now working towards a national space ecosystem. We will have a lot number of players. ISRO would be one competing, and the guardian unit maybe over the other agencies that we are talking about. So, good that we are responding to the need of the hour. So another estimate is that if we do not grow, you see the global space economy is growing at a massive pace. What is over $600 billion at the moment, it is soon by 2035 expected to go close to $2 trillion, and hence we must grow to capitalize on that. And that is the goal of Indian space program. The larger goal is that at present we are capitalizing nearly 2% of the entire space economy. We are targeting that by 2033-35 we should be capable of commanding over 8%, and as per the Space Vision 2047 we are also aiming to go over 10% of the total share in the global space economy. That's certainly going to happen only if we are allowing the players from the private sector. Another basic data value that you can also understand as to why it is so important. You see, if you compare the budget size of ISRO with that of NASA, historically it has been 17 times, 18 times more than that of ISRO that NASA has been holding. So with that much of difference, it is extremely difficult to expect ISRO to be satisfying the need of that large a population size that India represents. You see, there is another estimate that came up by Economic Times in 2024. ISRO's total investment to date is less than the single year's budget of NASA. I mean, that speaks loud enough that it is high time we have to allow the private sector to take up their job as well, and to exploit the advantages that are there in it. If I could quickly give you a look into what are the different major companies, we at the moment have over 400 startups which are operating. The main ones, as I have shown on the slide, you can pause on these slides and read the name of the companies for just a minute, like in the satellite manufacturing, in the launch vehicles, in the Earth observation analysis, space situational awareness, wherein they get to study the different objects in the space, their movement pattern and stuff, which is extremely important activity. And then of course the downstream activities, the ground segment mission operations, and so on. So there are multiple agencies which are already there lapping up the opportunity that is being offered to them. Now people, other than this, you see, all of us, and can you just pause at this and look at some of the news? There are so many. So some of the news of how the industries are responding very positively. I mean, you will almost every other day read the news about a particular startup is getting this much of funding. I mean, Reliance leads $50 million round in space tech startup Digantra, and many others. You see, just you can pause this slide and have a look at how these private companies have been managing to get so much of funding. So in a way it augurs well for the future. So now let me take you to the second segment of our discussion. I mean, both of these news have come almost at the same time and have been analyzed as linked with each other. How much of it is linkage, how much of it is desirable, what part of it is undesirable, something quickly let us get into. Now I am sure all of you must have come across this particular news which hogged the limelight, as over 100 scientists quit ISRO and they kind of retired early. And this was followed by another news that was clubbed together: Center tightens the exit rule. So the Department of Space has made it more difficult now, as there have been news of many ISRO scientists, more so from a couple of the centers like UR Rao Satellite Center and Vikram Sarabhai Space Center. They have decided to take voluntary retirement. This is being taken as a big shock. How big is it? I'll let you know. But then immediately that led to the barrage of such news. One common term that I found almost all of them use at the drop of a hat was brain drain. All these news, I will just quickly, you can gaze a look in this, and you can see all except one or two are saying that this is a grave problem and it reflects the brain drain that is happening from ISRO. Let us set the things correct. People, why they quit is a different matter. I'll come to that. But what was that memo that they're talking about of, a crisis. Can a government memo stop ISRO scientists from quitting and joining private rivals? Well, what was in the memo? Let us quickly look into, and is it what it is made out to be in the public fora? The memo accepts that yes, there have been resignations from some of the top scientific personnels, and in view of this, it has been decided that the voluntary retirement and the resignation requests from scientific and technical personnels, now here comes the important thing, associated with the Gaganyaan and other important mission may not be accepted as a matter of routine. So, there is no stop as such on the retirement. It is very categorically saying that given that a couple of such retirements have happened from the people who are associated with the high stake projects, to ensure these get finished in time because they are already delayed, there has been a restriction on that. But does Department of Space by any means want to make it difficult or shut the door for the exit point? Not at all. And then let us understand another aspect. Is it something which is being heard or read for the first time? Let me show you something. So this was the news that the Hindu also published on August 4. India produces smart scientists but is struggling to retain them. Well, this particular news particularly became that I would say amplified because a couple of people who kind of decided for voluntary retirement, Victor Joseph and Aditya Rallapalli, they were associated with some big projects. One of course was with Chandrayaan. He was with the GSLV Mark III program, which is also going to be the one that will take Gaganyaan into the space. But let me show you something more relevant. Now, is it something happening for the first time, or is it something which is happening with ISRO? Well, these are some of the old news, people. Have a look. Nearly 700 scientists quit DRDO in 6 years. This was the news, came up in 2012. So DRDO as an organization has been facing that. This is the answer given by the ministry in the parliament, listing out the number of such early exits have been made from DRDO 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19 and so on, and you can see there have been regular such figures. Let me show you. There was another news that came up in 2007. This news that was published by Economic Times says ISRO scientists leave for better pay. So they are leaving back then, and they say they are leaving for the better pay. Is it just the ISRO or DRDO? Have a look. SBI veterans dominate private sector bank CEO and MD appointments. So even in the banking, we are witnessing a similar kind of exit. You see here the ex-DRDO scientist pioneering Unistring into this particular company. So these are the two people which was published this year itself, have been instrumental in the a subsidiary of Zentech, a defense company. So they are entering into that. The point that I'm trying to make is this something which is a new phenomenon? Certainly not. We have had the similar such movements or cross migration in when the telecom revolution happened, when the banking transformation happened, when the defense sector also allowed ventured more into the private, and we are kind of experiencing the same for the space also. Now, very interestingly, as I have hinted in the earlier part of the discussion itself, people, let me tell you, there is this fundamental that we have to understand. India's science policy began with this science policy resolution of 1958, which was at the time when it was needed to build the government institutions which with the taxpayers' money would be engaging in the major research, because the private ecosystem back then was not that robust or not evolved. So the government took all in itself to use the taxpayers' money to conduct the important researches for the nation building, be it DRDO, be it ICMR, be it CSIR, or Department of Atomic Energy, TIFR, you name and you see that there are direct institutions for that. Fast forward to the present moment, you see what makes NASA that immensely successful. There is a very interesting article that was written by a group of people who are the who's who of Indian science. Mr. R.A. Mashelkar, who was the former Director General of CSIR, This paper got published in 2014. I would suggest all should give a read to this. It will give you a good wisdom into what ails India's innovation and what could be the administrative decisions to increase India's innovative ecosystems robustness. The paper is titled Rethinking Innovation Policy in India, Amplifying Spillovers Through Contracting Out. Let me speak it out. NASA from its very beginning started using whatever budgetary allocation that it gets, 80% of it, mind it, nearly 80% of it, to contract out its projects to the private companies. What that contracting out does, this contracting out of the projects to the private companies, to the universities, what they do, they create competing rivals. And under these competing rivals, that leads to more technological innovation, better prudence in the money usage, and better success at technology development. Take a view of the ongoing project Artemis. The Orion spacecraft is made by Lockheed Martin. Then the spacesuits would be made by Axiom Space. The lander would be made by the SpaceX. The SLS rocket, Boeing. And you see almost every aspect of theirs, this particular project, is made by the private companies only. For that matter, the entire integrated circuits, let me tell you, is the result of NASA creating the demand, and that leads to the development of integrated circuits way back, which is what that becomes the heart and soul of the electronics of the present time. Even NIH does exactly the same, National Institute of Health, US, which is what that they lent out that money to the private entities. We all owe a lot to these private companies of the Western worlds for having developed the COVID vaccines that the entire world depended so hugely on. Think about the Rafale deal that India has entered into. It has been developed by the private entities, of course, with the government funding that Dassault's received with them, France. So what we are now understanding is there is a term called knowledge spillover. Now, what is knowledge spillover? Whatever innovation that you generate, people, is something that then spills over and leads to more spread out or economic impact diffusion. Now, the argument that R.A. Mashelkar and the others are making in this, that the government agency, in this case Department of Space, ISRO, could facilitate such similar developments in the space also, where a lot part of their demand could be met by the private companies. It would help, creating more technology, faster rate, and of course the social good would be realized much faster. Because when it comes to taxpayers' money investment, the government generally or the agency would generally lie under that pressure not to fail. The research activities, the innovation activities happens when there is this freedom to fail, something which once you allow it into the private sector, their profit motive will allow them to try new ideas. And that is why this particular term, this is something, if at all you have watched this very, I would say, thought-provoking and a brilliantly made, web series called Made in India, that is after the life of Mr. Xerxes Desai, who was from Tata, but later he was seconded to, it is called secondment, wherein Tata lent him out to SIDCO, a government agency, for development of the civic infrastructure. And then Mr. Xerxes Desai came back to Tata and he created that huge Titan story. So what this paper also suggests, people, that we could create an ecosystem where the members of, so I'll just talk about this. So we could create an ecosystem of having a revolving door system. What it means is experts from NASA could have regular, associations or deputations with the private entities to return back to ISRO, I'm really sorry. ISRO, and vice versa. We could even allow the members of the private entities to come for deputations with ISRO and assist in multiple projects. So what we are now going to create is a revolving door ecosystem where it would be more robust infrastructure than what we have at the moment. It is also suggested that this particular movement that we are witnessing at the moment from ISRO is not a brain drain but a brain circulation, or what we are calling it as knowledge spillover. What does it mean? It simply means that the experts from ISRO are now entering into the private companies and expediting their growth. Please remember, the goal is not for ISRO to grow. The goal is for India's space ecosystem to grow. And the panic presentation of the newspaper is particularly because the memo that came out, but that memo, as I told you, was particularly to hint at some of the projects which the government of India wants to be finished as early as possible. But when it comes to supporting through the fund, supporting with the human resource is also something that is expected. We have already seen it has been happening all through. Whatever resignations in ISRO that happened, in the earlier time was, in a way, you could have said that brain drain, although I would avoid calling that term then as well, because most of them went into the, IT sector or something. Now, this is not to say that ISRO should not pull up its socks. This, I just mean to suggest, that is a very organic process of evolution. This is how it happens. You cannot stop it. Rather, ISRO has now got to increase its efficiency and become a more competitive player. So now what we are going to see is the principle of natural selection will operate, where ISRO now has to create better incentives. Those incentives could be for any professional enhancements of the degrees, there could be incentives, or for project specific incentives, project specific incentives for fulfillment of the project. Then the professional enrichment incentives. They have to also now look at the bureaucratic friction, if there, that should be ironed out. There should be proper rewards and recognitions. If missing, and there should be, as we mentioned earlier itself, regular exchanges with the private companies. With all of these, the charge that these people are, the scientists are leaving for higher pay might be, quite superficial an analysis. There are multiple reasons why they could be leaving. One of that could be the pay, of course, cannot be denied. But then other than that, there are, the documentation work, the administrative work that the government organizations come up with. So that could be also ensured, that is, brought into more seamless operation. And then there are hierarchical arrangement wherein many a times the project get delayed because of that. And of course, we could also ensure that the personnel of ISRO get more undivided focus on the single project instead of getting divided into multiple. Of course, that is only going to happen if we reduce the number of diversified activities with a limited human resource that ISRO at the moment is doing. So that is about the analysis of, is this a brain drain? Of course not. It is at the best the brain circulation, and this is what the paper particularly tries to highlight. I would advise you go get into that. It just says that the present model that we've been following is the make model, where the government funds through the taxes to these organizations, they develop the technology and the mission happens. But what we are now proposing is engage the universities, engage the startups, engage the industries. As with many, coming into it, they're finding the profit motive into it, will create competing ideas, and the chances of many competing ideas to succeed is far better than one agency under the pressure to use the taxpayers' fund very judiciously. So that is one major, idea that I would want all of you to carry. Anything else? You see, so ISRO is also now, understanding it. So ISRO calls for stronger academia-industry partnership to power future space mission. This was published by the Hindu in August 1. So there was this talk in Andhra University. So Academia Connect program that was conducted there, ISRO has made it clear that there has to be a strong academia-industry partnership that we also talked about earlier also. So yes, I believe are responding to it, and there is no reason to see red with all these resignations that have happened. It is part and parcel. Any sector, telecom, defense, banking, and the others have been through exactly that, and the same is the story across the world. If you just Google and check, you will find NASA over the last few years have been facing multiple resignations, but resignations and recruitment is something that keeps happening. There the reduction in one chunk last year happens up to 20% of the total workforce. So is it something new? Not at all. What we have to now look at is to how we are responding to this opportunity, not to take it as a challenge alone. So is ISRO losing talent, or is India gaining space ecosystem? My vote is unequivocally for the space ecosystem gain that we are having. So brain drain is a term that I would want you to avoid using. You could choose to use brain circulation. Knowledge spillover is an official term that we use, or what we also call it as positive externalities. So any government agencies developing any innovative idea can then go on to the private companies. They can sell the technology, or they can fund the private companies for them to develop the technology. This will all allow the faster diffusion of the technology and its impacts. So fine, this is a larger discussion. I believe that you have gained from it. I mean, I would suggest on some of the pages you can just pause and take down the notes, and these are some of the relevant questions. So you can pause at this point and also attempt writing some of these questions. These are going to be very probable questions around which UPSC can also ask you. I'll just read a couple of them, like India's space reforms represent a transition from state-owned space program to a national space ecosystem. Discuss in the light of the changing roles of ISRO in space, NSIL and private industry. I think we have covered it sufficiently well. The movement of scientists from public research institutions to private enterprises need not necessarily constitute brain drain. It may also represent brain circulation. Critically examine in the context of India's emerging space and innovation ecosystem. People, I advise you to pause, take down and give a practice and do brainstorming on the others. I hope you have taken down the notes, you have gained some wisdom from here. We'll meet again. Namaste. Thank you.